and introduce our speakers.
Thanks very much, Joan, and welcome everybody today to our webinar today on 5G deployment and security. As we all know, 5G is landing with us very quickly at the moment, and it brings with it lots of opportunities for many organizations to work differently. As is often the case with new technology, we as security professionals find ourselves helping to navigate the balance between functionality and security. And 5G is going to be embedded in the day-to-day operation of society and our critical national infrastructure. So in addition to the functionality versus security debate, because it is so critical to us, there's also the added dimension of international and national policy. And so today we have two speakers who are bringing to you who have views both on the functionality and technology involved, but also on the policy and how that's been embedded. So some of the things that we're going to cover are like, why is 5G different? What are the new risk vectors? The European 5G risk assessment process and the 5G Security Toolbox. The format of today is that we're going to have two short presentations from our panelists that will be followed by a moderated Q&A session. So we would ask you at any stage to feel free to put in questions into the Q&A box, and we should get to those then at the end of the presentation. So to discuss these topics with you, we have two expert panelists lined up for you today, and I'd like to welcome Dr. Silke Holtmanns, I hope I didn't destroy your name, and also Joseph Stevens. First to present is going to be Silke, and Silke is the head of 5G security research at AdaptiveMobile Security in Dublin. She has extensive experience in the telecommunications industry with a speciality in mobile security research for the last 20 years. Her career spans over 16 years with Nokia in a variety of security related roles, and she provides advice to standards boards, governments, and has presented telecommunications attacks at Black Hat, DEFCON and Disobey. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Silke. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for the nice introduction. Yeah, I've been around a bit. So let's talk a bit about 5G. Let's see here. Let's share the screen. So share. Okay, let's talk about 5G security. So maybe because we are a small company, brief intro. So AdaptiveMobile focuses on cyber telecommunication security, and we have a lot of customers all over the world. We are having a lot of data on security threats for messaging and also for the core network, but we are not a very big company. So here we are roughly 150 people, headquarter Ireland. I'm actually right now physically located in Finland. And working, I'm a sort of long distance worker, remote worker, but that's nowadays the default anyway, remote working. So, but we are scattered all over the world. So to be close to our customers and also sort of to do very often the data is not allowed to leave the customer premise. So we also do stuff locally for our customers. So much for AdaptiveMobile and mobile networks today. So if you think about, let's say, 20 years back, what you could get from a mobile network, maybe some mailbox were hacked or some messages maybe, but basically the value that an attacker could find in a mobile network, that was pretty low, if you think about it from an attacker's point of view. But nowadays in networks, you have that every a new car has to have an emergency call possibility. You have your personal pictures, Instagram, your personal preferences, what kind of stuff you watch on YouTube, you pay your parking tickets, you have chat with your family, you reset your passwords, or you confirm your purchases with SMS. You have your transport ticket, you use it for banking. I think there were recently some issues around that. And actually also even, let's say, the business side, let's push that side. So actually even, let's say, military-oriented companies, they use mobile apps and services. And then we have also the classical business stuff like fleet management for various purposes, like postal delivery services or similar. So, but also you can see that sometimes data is leaked and we get into sort of trouble because of that. So what kind of attacks do we see in the mobile world? So recently we saw these kind of smishing fraud where people, where somebody imposing the Bank of Ireland was contacting users and try to basically trick them in one way or the other. And there are old vulnerabilities in the core network, SS7, which I will talk about later. And there are also sort of annoying calls, tech scams, and various. So it's not a theory that mobile networks are under attack. They are under attack to a different degree. Not every network is equally vulnerable. So let's have a brief look how networks evolved. So in the beginning, I mean, that was all 1G. Everything was closed. It was just voice. The networks were owned by operators, and then slowly expanded and expanded. And now with 5G, we have private networks, we have networks used by governments, we have virtualization, everything is connected. And we have a lot of different kind of applications which use the technology of mobile communication. So you might ask yourself, okay, what's the fuss about 5G? I mean, what's the main difference between, why are we now worried about 5G? Shouldn't be, why suddenly sort of is it different? And two things have actually made change. One is the technology. So meaning that 5G networks are going to be much more open to third parties. So to businesses, to health, to all these kind of fancy use cases, entertainment, fleet management. So it's no longer a closed system. And every IT person can say, oh, if you open up an interface, you have to watch out for surprises. The other major change is that 5G will be using IT technology. It will use virtualization, meaning cloud. It will use HTTP and REST API. And everybody of you has used in the past HTTP and REST API. If you do an Amazon purchase, you use REST API. So this is technology that 5G will be using. And as we saw before, 5G networks are not immune to attacks. The other major change we see in the society, which means that the society itself depends much more on mobile networks. I recently tried to park my car and had to download an app so that I could park my car and pay for it. So because there was no longer a thing where I can put money in. So, and also 5G comes at a time where the political stability is, I would say, well, you can look right or left or over this water or that water and say political stability is no longer to be taken for granted or sensible politicians. So the trust relationships change between countries. So this comes at the same time where 5G is rolled out, which also has an impact on the security discussion. 5G risks, well, these are not 5G risks, let's put it that way. So what are 5G risks? Not burning towers and not bats or sort of viruses over the air. So these are not 5G risks. 5G risks are different ones. So in brief, you can categorize it into these boxes. So what is the 5G network? So meaning building, access control, all the things that we already know. And I'm pretty sure Jacky knows very much about that stuff. So then what do you buy? This is very often what we see as a supply chain discussion. So what kind of quality do you get when you buy something? Then I will talk a bit more about operations, sort of threat analysis and how attacks look like. And then we have how you can, how you can protect your network against all those kind of threats. Joseph will later on talk a bit about the legal side of things and what the government is particularly doing on the supply chain and similar risks. So let's go to attackers. Basically for mobile networks, you have two types of attackers. You have either nation-state attacks or you have people that are after money. So the first category, nation states, it's not the way that every state attacks every other state. There are specialized surveillance companies. They offer surveillance as a service. They go basically, they do the job for everybody who pays. And usually those guys are not visible to the user and very often also not noticed by operators because those guys are extremely stealthy and know what they do. Then we have on the other side, we have the spammers and the fraud and so on. And usually because it goes very often along with social engineering, they are visible to the user. And I think Ireland also recently got the share of that one. So we have these two attack categories. One is more short-term risk, the other is a long-term risk. One thing to be aware of, that those guys are very fast. So here we did an analysis of COVID-19 related spam. And you can see within basically 2 weeks, the numbers went skyrocket up. I'm pretty sure that right now they will send messages about fetch your free masks or things like that, or claim your government compensation or something like that. So they react very fast if they see an opportunity. The other thing about surveillance companies, they use different protocols or technologies. So these on the top here, these are telco protocols, but they also use attack patterns that we know from the, let's say from IT area, meaning border gateway protocol, DNS. They play around with coding formats, with paddings, with how the fields are used. And so they pick from the IT world and from the telco world the attack patterns. On the right-hand side, you see a graphics basically where some person was tracked and the information of where the person was extracted. And these were the exfiltration address, so meaning the addresses where the location was sent to. So they had a bunch of addresses where the data was sent to, just to avoid detection. So, and also when they launch their attacks, they launch it from many different places. It's not that you can say, hey, those guys are bad, so I block them. It's not so easy. So they have a range of bases where they launch their attacks from. So that's how surveillance attackers work. They are a bit more sophisticated. So 5G in a nutshell. Old telco style security, it's no longer sort of sufficient in that sense that the system is no longer closed. Just buying a secure box, putting it in the network is not enough. You need to think more like IT security. You also update your virus scanner regularly. This should be a sort of same idea for IT networks. Opening up to partners. Partners are good, but nothing is foolproof. They might be hacked. There might be a rogue partner. You have to check that partners stick to their agreements. And important, learning from IT world. We need to keep up our protection. Look what's happening, look what kind of threats, and also react it because those guys are fast. So basically have defense in depth. So that's in a nutshell, 5G. And we have more if on the different kind of things, sort of if you're interested in specifics on the stuff that I just brushed here on the side, there is more. And I think Joseph will now tell us more about the policy part. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Silke. That was a really good presentation. And I'd now like to introduce you to Joseph Stevens. Joseph is a cybersecurity specialist working with the National Cybersecurity Centre. He served as a captain in the Irish Defence Forces for 14 years prior to this, and his current work with the NCSC focuses on building cyber resilience and capacity in Ireland's critical national infrastructure. Joseph leads the NCSC's work on telecommunications security policy, and he has coordinated Ireland's national risk assessment on 5G security and participated in authoring the EU risk assessment and 5G security toolbox. And today Joseph will be sharing his thoughts on the 5G risk assessment and the toolbox. So thank you very much, Joseph.
Thanks very much, Jacky, for that introduction, and thanks, Silke, for the really interesting presentation, taking a look at some of the technical side of things. As Jacky said, I'm going to take a little bit of a higher level look now at some of the policy actions that are happening at a European level, but also at a national level in 5G. So hopefully everybody can see my presentation at this point. Well, I'll just, yeah, I see I got the thumbs up there. Okay, so looking at this, what you see on the screen here in the top right there is Commission Recommendation 2335, which was the European Union, the sort of genesis and roadmap that the EU set out for the coordinated work on 5G security. And so you can see the timeline across the bottom there, and I won't go into every milestone in detail, but I'll point out a few of the important ones. But what the document did, first of all, was recognize the criticality of 5G networks. So how important these networks are underpinning critical services like autonomous vehicles, e-health, Internet of Things, or the industrial Internet of Things. And it's basically going to be the lifeblood of the society and economy across the European Union in the next coming decades. So with that importance, they realized that we needed to take a coordinated look at that. And one of the main reasons is because these networks, far more than in previous generations, are going to be interconnected, they're going to be transnational, and any incident affecting a 5G network will likely have a cross-border impact. So what this recommendation asked member states to do was three things. Firstly, for each member state to do a national risk assessment on 5G. Then secondly, for the member states to submit those risk assessments and jointly write a coordinated EU risk assessment. And that was published just over a year ago on the 9th of October last year. And I'll give you a high-level overview of some of the findings of that report shortly. And then the next major milestone was the production of the European 5G Security Toolbox. And what the toolbox is the member states looking at the risks that we've identified in 5G and selecting mitigation measures that member states can take to reduce or minimize the impact of those risks. And that was published in January of this year. So we're a couple of months into it. Obviously, we've then now had to deal with COVID, which has had an impact on our work, but things are pretty much on schedule. And you can see in the timeline there that there's ticks all across, and the final milestone is basically to do a review of this process. And you can be sure that the work in this area will continue because the threats to 5G are being realized more and more, and the work needs to continue in this area. So looking at the risk assessment, so this was kind of the first time that member states had come together to produce a joint position on something that covered not just cybersecurity, but also national security. And it was challenging for a few reasons. Firstly, the timelines that we set ourselves were quite ambitious because this is a fast-moving area, so policy needed to move in a more nimble way than previously. and another challenge was the scale of the question being asked. Looking at a risk assessment of 5G networks in their entirety is no mean feat, and it was quite an ambitious proposition. But ultimately, this process was excellent because it brought together the expertise and knowledge from 28 member states at the time, because the UK were involved, but 28 member states pooled their knowledge, their resources, their expertise, and focused those on this complex issue of 5G, and we were able to produce this coordinated risk assessment. So looking at the risk assessment in a little bit more detail, and I'd advise anyone who hasn't at this stage to read this report, because it's really excellent, in my opinion. It's one of the most detailed risk assessments that you'll find produced by international organizations or countries. But some of the main conclusions are, firstly, that there'll be an increased exposure to attacks and more potential entry points for attackers. And what that does is that speaks to something Silke mentioned earlier about 5G involving many more connected devices, opening up to an Internet of Things, and that's going to increase the attack surface and provide a potential entry points for attackers. Secondly, another major conclusion is that certain network equipment is becoming more sensitive. And what we mean by that is, as Silke mentioned, 5G networks are becoming more IT-like and virtualized. And as a result, more of the critical functions are being processed closer to the edge. So moving out to the edge devices, like that might have been traditionally considered not as critical, are now becoming much more sensitive. Another major conclusion is that mobile network operators are going to have an increased reliance on their suppliers. So that speaks to the supply chain issue. due to the complexity of mobile networks and 5G networks, there's going to be an increased reliance on suppliers. You're going to require your suppliers not just to build these networks, but also to assist you in the operation of the network. And as a result of that, that means that the risk profile of that supplier is much, much more important now than it would have been in previous networks. And then in a related point, there's an increased risk on becoming dependent on a supplier. So if as a network operator or as a nation as a whole, you're completely reliant on an individual supplier, then that introduces new risks with regard to the supply chain if there was to be an interruption either for financial reasons or as a result of trade sanctions or as a result of a systemic vulnerability within your equipment. And given the state of the 5G equipment marketplace, it's not that diverse at the moment. That's a major risk. And then finally, it was concluded that threats to confidentiality, integrity, and availability are becoming major concerns. And that speaks to that 5G networks are going to support critical national infrastructure. So any incident on a 5G network is going to have a much greater impact than it would have in previous generations. So essentially, the main conclusion of the risk assessment was due to these new risks, a new security paradigm is required, and we need new tools to deal with this. And look, that's been a very, very quick overview of the main conclusions. I would recommend that people read the report. It's quite in depth. The work that we did, we identified over 360 vulnerabilities. There was 36 high-level risks rated and produced 9 concrete scenarios that are worth examining to see what type of things can go wrong on a 5G network. So that was the risk assessment. And then the ultimate work of this group was to produce the European Cybersecurity Toolbox. So how we're going to deal with these risks, both the strategic risks, but also the technical risks. And so what the toolbox is it looked at this risk assessment report that I've just given you an overview, but it also took input from BEREC, the body of European regulators. It also took input from ENISA, who produced a really detailed threat landscape report on 5G networks. And it also had input from the European Intelligence and Analysis Centre, as well as Europol, and many other stakeholders. These are just representative of some of the stakeholders that had input. And we produced this common toolbox to address the risks. And when we look inside the toolbox, it has 2 types of measures. It has firstly strategic measures. And these strategic measures look at, as the name suggests, the strategic risks. So you're looking at those type of things I would have identified: the lack of diversity in the marketplace, understanding the risk profile of your suppliers, having state tools to be able to intervene in a case where there's threats to national security, fostering a more diverse ecosystem, those type of strategic level measures. And then there was also equally important, the technical measures. And these address many of the risks that Silke would have highlighted in her presentation. So ensuring that we have good baseline security measures and best practice that's already been adopted in the IT world, bringing it into the telecommunications world, but also ensuring that specific 5G recommendations in standards that are currently optional are made mandatory. It also talks about certification of equipment, so making sure that equipment, and when I say equipment, I mean hardware, software, firmware, all parts of the network, that they're certified, that the code has been examined, that penetration tests have been done, and also ensuring that network operators have excellent resilience and continuity plans so that we can respond to incidents as they arise. So again, a very quick overview of the document. Again, this document is published online, and I would advise people to have a look in detail about what those measures mean. There's a great framework there for member states to take in addressing the risks when it comes to 5G networks. So as I said, I only had a quick look at what's in the toolbox, but at a high level, these are the main recommendations. So on the left, you have what member states have been asked to do, and that is member states have been asked to firstly strengthen the security requirements on mobile network operators. They've also been asked to assess the risk profile of suppliers and apply relevant restrictions to those suppliers that are considered as high risk. And we've also been asked to ensure that operators have an appropriate multi-vendor strategy to avoid and limit major dependencies on a single supplier. And then the EU is focusing on high-level strategic goals to diversify the supply chain and to increase the level of assurance throughout the ecosystem. So we're going to look a little bit more detail on this one, on the strengthening security requirements for mobile network operators. So our national cybersecurity strategy was published in December of last year, and it recognized many of the risks that we would have seen in the 5G risk assessment. I won't reiterate them there because I'm conscious of my time, but the main conclusion is that we need new tools and new regulatory instruments to deal with these new risks. and we've set out a roadmap for achieving that. There's 20 measures in the National Cybersecurity Strategy. The 7th one is about telecommunications security and introducing a new set of security requirements for the telecommunications sector. So how we're doing that is through the Telecommunications Security Requirements Working Group. This is a group that was established with our colleagues in Comreg, the communications regulator, as well as in the wider department. The name has obviously changed now to the Environment, Climate and Communications. But we also importantly invited expertise from the network operators to take part in this process. So we've selected various different network operators of varying sizes, from the largest mobile network operators down to smaller operators to fiber fixed line providers, to provide their expertise and input into this process. And what we've done is we've organized a series of workshops over this year, looking at the areas that are high risk in the European and national risk assessment, and addressing the mitigation measures that have been recommended in the toolbox, and translating them into security requirements. So we were due to hold our first workshop at the end of March, and it was supposed to be in person. But as you can imagine, we've had to readjust and move on to a virtual platform. And that's actually worked to our favor, because we've been able to divide it into shorter, sharper sessions of about 2 to 3 hours, looking at these areas in great depth. And we've been able to get expertise from across the globe to attend these events. So we've had expertise from the US, from Europe, from Asia. We've had over 20 speakers from academia, industry, and they've given an introduction to the risks on day one, as well as then helping us form our discussions for day two, where we have a closed group and we have a breakout discussion. And that can take the form of roundtable discussions, threat modeling, running through some real life incidents, as well as some exercise scenarios. And then the final day is about the document itself, looking at the requirements and saying these are the baseline requirements that we're going to require of mobile network operators. And so how the document looks, this is still in draft, it's still evolving, but for each section that we've identified, we'll give an overview of the risk. We'll give a list of good principles and security practices that are in line with the toolbox on how to mitigate those risks. We'll have some more detailed implementation guidance on a proportional basis on how operators implement those principles. And then finally, and this is one of the most important parts, we'll be mapping it to the relevant international standards and technical specifications, because there's been a huge body of work done, and Silke will have been part of this in GSMA, 3GPP, other standards bodies like NIST, ISO, who produce great guidance and documentation. And we're not going to reinvent the wheel in a lot of areas. Where the work has been done, we'll leverage that work. And so we've identified, these are the first areas that we're looking at, but this is a living document and an evolving document. So as new risks arise, we will produce new telecom security requirements for those areas. But I won't read them out on the screen, but you can see how they line up with a lot of the risks that have been identified in both the European and national risk assessment. So I think I'm just within the time. So I think that's pretty much it from me. I've given a really whistle-stop tour of things there, but I hope it's given some insight to the viewers on what's happening from a policy perspective. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Joe. That was very interesting. At this point, we're going to move into kind of a panel discussion and Q&A session. So please feel free to put, I can see we already have some questions in the Q&A box, but please feel free to add any other questions you have, either for Silke or for Joseph. And I might suggest that you put yourselves onto gallery view at this stage, because that means you can see all the speakers as we're having the discussions. So I'm going to do that myself. And to start off with, I have a question here for Joe. Much of the EU toolbox is concerned with issues associated with high-risk vendors. Will Ireland be banning any suppliers? You knew that was going to come, Joe.
Unsurprising. Okay, so look, firstly, both our national risk assessment and the EU risk assessment, they highlighted the fact that the role of vendors in 5G networks is critical to the security, and I highlighted that during the presentation. And it also requires that member states assess the risks associated with vendors. So that looks at technical risks, but also non-technical risks. So the legal and constitutional framework in the country of origin, the governance model and ownership of the supplier, the ability to assure future supply, and the toolbox requires that member states conduct those risk assessments and apply restrictions to vendors considered high risk, including in areas of the network that are considered critical and sensitive. So the risk assessment would have highlighted those areas, core network functions, network management and orchestration functions, access functions. And we've committed to the implementation of the toolbox in full, and Minister Ryan would have done so in recent parliamentary questions in the Dáil and through recent EU Council conclusions. So the precise means by how that will be done is still under consideration, but we expect to have a position in this in more detail in the coming weeks. But I hope that's given some insight into our thinking in that regard.
Okay, thanks very much, Joe. And Silke, I have one here for you. If a company wants to connect or utilize 5G today as a key element in their business proposition, what would you advise that they do at this point?
I think you have to think of what kind of business you have and how reliable you are on this communication technology. If you are if you're really dependent on it, then you should put it in a service layer agreement, because you put their bandwidth, you put their quality of service, availability and things like that. And also security should be part of the service level agreement. If it's important to you, it should be there. So as simple as that. So that also gives the operator the incentive to invest in security, because for them it's a business differentiator. So that makes both sides happy.
Okay, thank you, Silke. And this is one possibly, well, for either of you, I think. How has the European approach to 5G and the application of a security baseline requirement differed to the US approach? I don't know who wants to take that one.
I can start on the signaling part. Okay. So the US has signaling guideline FCC for SS7, 4G and 5G, and but it's a guideline. It's not mandatory for the operators to follow it. So they can or cannot do it. For robocalls, it's actually mandatory. So that's the current status in US. And Joseph can maybe say more on the how the EU is going to handle that.
Well, I can only speak for the EU process, because that's what I've been part of. And what I can say is the EU, I've been really impressed with the way they've approached this, because we've gone for the evidence. It's been very transparent, the process. The documents we produce are published, and we've done this out in the open, and so anyone can follow along with how we're evaluating 5G. So I think I can say that that's been the EU approach anyway.
Okay, thank you very much. So also, how do you foresee the implementation of the strategy at a local and a regional level? And I might ask you to start off with that one, Joe, please.
So the question is, how has the strategy been implemented at a local and regional level?
Yes.
Is that I presume they mean the European toolbox?
I think so, yes.
Okay, yeah. So it basically depends on each member state, because when you look at the risks associated with 5G networks, you're not just talking about technical risk, you're also talking about national security issues, and that's within the member state's competence. So each member state can decide themselves their own course in that regard. So what the toolbox does is it gives a common framework that everybody can use, but then how it's implemented in each member state differs slightly. So how France has implemented it, how they've implemented it is slightly different to how, say, Estonia has implemented it, to how Ireland has implemented it. And that's why each member state did their own risk assessment and can select the tools from the toolbox and apply to their own national situation. So it has been implemented in a slightly fragmented way, but that's because every nation has their own national security interests.
All right, thanks very much, Joe. And I've one here for you, Silke. Can you provide more examples of real-world attack scenarios using 5G that you've either seen in the wild or as a POC?
Okay, 5G in the moment, what you have out there is basically this radio access network. This one is pretty well protected. For 5G core network and interconnection, the part that I look at, I think there are the first interconnections are open between one Asian country and one Central European country. So there are not that many. Basically, the attackers, they still use SS7 and 4G because it works. So, but the attackers have a toolbox. So basically, they pick what gives them the results. So, and what they want is, most of the time we see location tracking attacks. We see that's most of them. Then we see SMS interception is very popular, eavesdropping, but as I said, sort of location tracking is the most common one of usually of high importance persons. But also data interception and things like that. So we see various ones, and there are thousands of them per day. So every day I see some. So usually only get to see them face to face when they pull up a new trick.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much, Silke.
Yeah.
Here's one for you, Joe. What sort of opportunities do you think 5G will bring to Cyber Ireland's members?
Sorry, just unmuting. So, well, what I've outlined there in my presentation is there's a huge amount of threats in the 5G landscape, but that's opportunities for 5G, for Cyber Ireland members, in my opinion. So, firstly, 5G networks, they're increasing in complexity. So you're going to see a huge amount of virtualization and the orchestration of those virtual functions. And there's also going to be a vast jump in the number of connected devices. So with that increased complexity, there's going to come the need for more sophisticated monitoring tools, and operators are going to require expertise in cybersecurity now more than ever, in my opinion. So I think that there's an opportunity there, first of all. And then secondly, that this work on 5G at an EU level is part of a larger focus within the EU on increasing the level of cybersecurity. So you're seeing other things like the NIS directive is currently under review, which may enhance its scope and have a broader application. There was recently the introduction of the EU Cybersecurity Act, which brings certification into a vast range of products. There's also work being done in IoT security. So Europe is focusing very heavily on cybersecurity, and I think that's going to create great opportunities for Cyber Ireland members and the expertise and knowledge we have here with the cluster.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Joe. Here's a question for you, Silke. This person understands the concerns related to 5G, but what is going to happen to older networks like 4G networks from a security perspective? As in, this person thinks that they'll be used for a short time, or not for a short time going onwards.
They are going to be there for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
I mean, let's not make any mistake there. I mean, these things are expensive. That's one reason. So, of course, operators try to optimize return of investment, which is sort of absolutely okay. And the other reason is if you roam, let's say, to a country where the infrastructure is not so advanced, you still want to have connectivity if you go to that country on holiday or for business reasons. So the Irish operator, even if it has everything 5G, it will still have a sort of interface so that it can talk to operators which only have 2G or 3G or 4G. And of course, you need also to protect that interface, because else you might it works that way that the old style messages come to the network, then they are sort of translated into 5G language. And you don't want that attacks are automatically translated. So you need to have in the translation box between the old and the new protocols, you need also have security capabilities there. So to recognize that even if you have a full 5G network, hey, there's somebody trying to trick me with an old protocol. So it's going to be there for a long while, and we still need security for the old stuff.
Okay, thank you, Silke. And here's one for you, Joe. With limited 5G use cases currently available, how can you assess the effectiveness of the 5G security toolbox?
Yeah, it's a good question. So that's why I think that this process of assessing the risks associated with 5G networks is not a point in time, done and dusted, and then you move on. 5G, and what we're seeing deployed at the moment, it's called 5G, but in reality, it's a 4G core network with some 5G radios to increase the capacity. But when we see true 5G is going to be something different, when we see a totally virtualized core, when the radio access network is also virtualized, and that's when you're going to start to see new use cases arise. That's not going to be for a number of years. And I agree with that comment that in order to assess the effectiveness of the 5G security toolbox, we're going to need to reevaluate it as time goes on and as new use cases arise.
Okay, and actually as a follow-on question to that, somebody's asked, will the security posture of the operators be assessed using the guidelines in the toolbox? Is that the current plan, do you know?
Yeah, so the TSRs, they're security requirements for the operators, and we'll be working with our colleagues in Comreg to supervise the implementation of these TSRs and to ensure that the operators implement them. So they've been part of the process. We wanted to make sure that the TSRs, they're not just something that we dreamt up, that they're implementable on networks and that they make sense. And then we will, Comreg will have the responsibility for supervising their implementation in the network operators.
Okay, thank you. And here's one for you, Silke. Do you think that there will be compromises made between security and speed requirements of 5G?
It has happened in the past, to be fair. So, because sometimes when the network is under high load, then some security functionality is switched off. It happens once in a while. But I hope not. And that's also why I think this policy, that evolution that we see right now, that wasn't there in the past. So there was no benefit, let's put it that way, sort of for an operator to have always the best security. I mean, of course, it's good for the business and it's good if you don't have incidents and so on, but there was no direct return of investment, and there was also no, as an operator, you didn't get more subscriber because you had good security. And that makes justification of an investment very difficult. So therefore, but I think this is now changing actually for 5G due to the policy developments that we see now, that operators are willing to invest also in high quality security and really make a difference there. So yeah, so I think it has changed. So meaning that not only the functions are there in the network nodes when they buy it, but that they also are used by operators. So because that's a two-sided thing. The standard 3GPP say, okay, the vendors have to implement, let's say, IPsec and whatever, but the usage is usually left to the operators, and it's optional to use for operators. And there comes the important policy angle, especially if it's, let's say, EU angle that says, okay, all the communications on this interface have to use IPsec. And that's then sort of pushing it. And I think that's a good thing because it generally increases the resilience to attacks.
Okay, thanks, Silke. The one of the attendees wants to ask, how do you foresee 5G changing how the international business sector in Ireland operates over the next 2 to 3 years? Joe, would you like to take a go at that one?
I'd honestly be speaking out of my area of competence there. So I'm more on the cybersecurity technical side of things. So I couldn't really take out the crystal ball and guess how it's going to affect the financial services industry. Other than, no, I won't speak because I'll probably say something that
No problem. Silke, would you have a view on that at all?
I think, I mean, especially now with the situation that everybody is remotely working, I think the general reliance on 5G will become much bigger. So I think that's a sort of an easy guess. Let's see. And on these services, I think many things will be optimized using 5G. So it doesn't matter if it's now pizza delivery or waste bin emptying or whatever. So, or that companies will use 5G, basically a 5G slice for their manufacturing side, and then additional extended to the sales personnel who are on the field or things like that. So I think we will see many use cases like that, but in which order and which will be the sort of main one. I mean, in my book, probably it's entertainment, knowing people. So, but I think we will also see many industrial use cases popping up where we sort of haven't thought about before. So.
Yeah, and I've lost the link to this particular question actually, but there was one question came in earlier, and I think it's kind of possibly linked to that. I'd like to throw this one to you as well, Silke, in relation to broadband, and you know, like the kind of rollout of broadband in Ireland. Do you think 5G will have an impact on that and the need for it?
Yeah, actually the need for it I can confirm, because actually I'm sitting here in Finland and I no longer have broadband. I just have cellular network here. So we have 2 stations here, 2 connections here in our home. We have been running 4 video conferences at the same time over 1 connection. So I don't need fixed network. So
Okay, good to hear. Thank you.
so.
So another question here, will so-called end-to-end encryption messaging services continue to provide adequate protection across 5G networks for end users and businesses?
I think this is a 2-part question. One is about the technical part and one is about the lawful interception part.
Yes.
The technical part, in the moment, it works that way that actually the HTTP or the traffic, the user traffic in the protection over the air interface, meaning from your phone to the antenna, is protected. Inside the core network, the traffic is in plane. So that's how it works today. Mm-hmm. And the other question is basically because the operator has to provide lawful interception. They are legally obliged to it, so they cannot say no to it. But then there is the interesting question, like over-the-top providers like WhatsApp, Telegram, name it, which actually provide end-to-end encryption, how much they should or could fall under this lawful interception requirement. And that's a regulator question, which I hand over to Olaf.
Yes, so it's an ongoing debate on the encryption side and the so-called providing of a backdoor into those over-the-top apps. I think even as recently as this week, there was a joint call with the US, the UK, and a number of other states calling for that backdoor. But I mean, it's that age-old debate that will it be abused? Then is it? I mean, it's a fact it will make encryption less secure. So it's whether you value privacy or whether you value allowing law enforcement to do their job. So it's been going on. The encryption wars have been going on for 2 decades or 3 decades or more now, and I think it will continue.
Yeah, it's a long-running debate, and it's one of those debates that people have very firm views on either side, actually. So I think it's going to be a difficult one to kind of come to conclusions on. I suppose we're coming to the end now, and I would like to give you both an opportunity to give us some parting thoughts on either what you think the biggest security threat or the biggest opportunity is with 5G. So if I could ask you first, Silke.
Okay, the biggest opportunity is really that we can connect a lot of things and have a lot of opportunities also for countryside and so on to connect. And I think the biggest threat, actually, in my very personal opinion, lies in the complexity of 5G and to get basically the 5G network and legacy integration set up and updated in a secure manner. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. And same question to you, Joe. What do you view as being the biggest security threat or potentially the biggest opportunity with 5G?
Silke stole the good answer there, but I'll try and think about it. No, honestly, I think one of the biggest threats is it's an answer that people throw out, but it's actually the unknown. If you think back to Silke's presentation there, where you went through the various generations of networks, and if people tried to imagine during the 2G era what the attacks in 4G would be, it would be impossible to imagine. And I really think that we don't yet understand some of the major risks that are out there. But then one of the ones that we do know is that the increase in complexity and automation is going to give rise to huge issues, I think. And then the opportunities, I really do think that new use cases that aren't impossible with the current latency are going to arise. And you're going to see things like autonomous vehicles, even remote surgery, and allowing more and more things to connect to the internet rather than people is going to be revolutionary, I think.
Okay, well, at this point, I would like to thank Silke and Joseph very much for sharing all their presentation today. I want to apologize we had a lot of questions in, so to all the people whose questions that we didn't get to, I want to apologize, but unfortunately we're coming to the end of the hour. So thank you again, Silke and Joe, for sharing your thoughts with us today. And I want to hand back over to Owen Byrne, who just has a few parting words for us from Cyber Ireland.
That's great. Thanks very much, Jacky. I think there were some real practical insights there from both Joe and Silke around what's the difference between 5G and also the new security challenges of 5G as well. And then from the regulatory perspective, the EU 5G risk assessment process and the 5G Security Toolbox. So as was highlighted, I think it's clear that the increasing complexity, the virtualization, increased number of connected devices, this is all going to result in a greater need for security. And as Joe noted then as well, the EU is really focused on increasing its cyber security. So these are all opportunities for Cyber Ireland members. So just to wrap up,